Maverick. Noun, unusual person. A visionary, leader, go-getter, an independent thinker. They see the vision for their life and pull that future towards them with an unyielding belief that things can and must be better. They achieve what most won't. Innovative, influential, daring, and direct, with a remarkably high tolerance for taking calculated risk. A foe to the status quo. This is Passive Real Estate Investing with Mavericks. Your host, Neil Timmins, has been involved with over $300 million in real estate transactions. He's a published author, commercial property investor, and real estate syndicator. This show is for those who want to learn how to earn passive income through real estate investing. Now, here's your host, Neil Timmins.
On this episode of Passive Real Estate Investing with Mavericks, I sit down with Joel Friedland to uncover all-cash industrial deals.
Hey Mavericks, this is Ava Baukamp, and this episode of Passive Real Estate Investing with Mavericks is brought to you by Legacy Impact Investors. We are an industrial investment firm located in cash flow country, the Midwest. We strive to shield off risk and beat inflation, all while producing predictable cash flow. We curate real estate investment opportunities for busy professionals and other real estate investors seeking passive income. To learn more about what we do and connect with me, go to www.legacyimpactinvestors.com.
Welcome to Passive Real Estate Investing with Mavericks, where we provide actionable steps for you to grow your passive income and become job optional. During this episode, you're going to get to discover doing all cash industrial deals. For those of you who are new, I'm your host, Neil Timmins. I love passive income from real estate. Now, before I introduce you to today's Maverick, I want to make a request that at any point you like what you hear, give us a thumbs up. Be certain to subscribe to the show. Never miss a valuable episode. And if you love what you hear, well, give us a written review. Plus, be sure to look at the description of this episode. We packed it with thousands of dollars in free resources. Now, today, we've got the privilege to learn from a person who's going on nearly 5 decades in commercial real estate. Prior to his career in real estate, he was just graduated the University of Michigan. It all changed when somebody said, cold call this guy and talk to him about real estate. I would describe today's Maverick as somebody who's absolutely passionate about relationships. Today's Maverick, Joel Friedland's here with me. Joel, how are you?
Great. Thanks, Neil.
I'm glad that you're here. We've connected offline, so I'm excited to hear the audience listen into our conversation today. Say, for their benefit, who are you? Where are you from? What do you do?
Sure. I am a real estate syndicator. I'm an industrial real estate syndicator in Chicago, specializing in B and C industrial, which means older buildings, smaller buildings, not competing with the institutions for those great big warehouses you see on the side of the tollways. And I've got 250 investors. I've been doing this for 43 years. I do my deals now all cash, no debt, no mortgages. And I can get into the reason for that, having to do with being risk averse and having been through some tragic, disturbing times when things were rough. Literally tragic. I mean, it was just rough. And so today we own 15 industrial buildings, which is down from 50 because it's a difficult time right now to be a buyer. In Chicago, industrials at the highest level it's ever been. There is no downturn. There is no relenting. Tough to buy properties today.
You've given us a lot, so we got a lot of hoods to uncover, if you will. Take me to the very beginning. Tell me about your very first commercial transaction.
So I can tell you that I leased a building to a guy whose name was Dick Mockney, who I can remember 1981. I was working for a family named Podolsky. I cold called them right out of college. I went to the University of Michigan and I was looking for a job in real estate, didn't know what industrial was. And someone told me to call this man, Milton Podolsky. And I cold called him and he and his son met with me that day and they hired me to fill some of their vacancies. They had 84 industrial syndicated buildings, 6 million square feet, and 10 of them were vacant. And they said, what would you do to fill our buildings? And I said, well, I would do what I did when I went door to door to get people to hire me as a kid to cut their lawns. I go door to door. I'd go to industrial parks and ask people to relocate into your vacant buildings. And that's what I did. I actually started cold calling. There are 7,000 industrial buildings in Chicago that I've called on. It's a lot.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. And so the first year, I probably did 1,000 of those. And I filled up 9 of their vacancies. Interest rates were 17%. Nobody wanted to move. The economy was a disaster. And I started during that horrible time. And I gained the trust of the Podolskis, and Steve Podolsky, the son, became my mentor. And to this day, in his 70s, is not only a close friend and still a mentor, but he's also an investor in what we do today. So I'm into maintaining really long-term relationships with people.
Incredible. Well, it sounds like a terrible time, but at the same time, it sounds like a tremendous opportunity for yourself. What do you possess that allowed you to have success and get through that environment?
I was fearless and stupid. I'm not kidding.
Sometimes one and the same.
Yeah. I just believe in the power of connecting with people in person. I don't think that making phone calls and sending texts and emails is nearly as effective as meeting people. And if you talk to someone on the phone on a cold call and then went to a restaurant that night for dinner and the person was sitting at the next table and literally you were facing that person, you wouldn't know it.
Correct.
But if you went door to door canvassing and met that person and sat at the table next to him, you'd say, "Hey, Jim, what a coincidence." And that personal connection is everything to me, both with my investors, with my tenants, and with the brokers too, with the industrial real estate brokers in the Chicago area.
Fair to say that was an early fundamental belief for you.
Yeah, it was foundational.
Better word than I utilize. So with that being foundational, how has that played a role in your 40 plus year career doing this?
Well, the way to build trust, in my experience, is to connect with people and share honest, and I'll get into honesty in a minute because I think a lot of people in real estate are a bunch of liars. And by the way, I've lied. I'm sure you have too. If anyone says they've never lied, they're a liar.
My wife occasionally asks me, "How do I look, honey?" And there's only one correct answer.
In real estate, it's a little deeper than that because if you're negotiating a deal for $3 million, everybody seems to think that negotiating isn't lying, even if what you say is not true. So it depends how you define it. But getting together with people and building trust, you do it over lunches and dinners and golf games and working together on deals. And that's really the foundational aspect of my business is I know all 250 of my investors. And I would say that if they were all in one room, I could say hello to all 250 by name and shake their hand and look into their eyes and know who they are and they know who I am. Mm-hmm. And the same is true of my tenants. And the same is true of most of the industrial brokers in the Chicago area. We've got this hyper focus on these B and C industrial buildings in Chicago. And that's really what matters most is knowing our market so well that there's nobody who knows it better, because it's hard for us to be in a situation where someone pulls the wool over our eyes if we know the neighborhoods block by block. And I've heard you talk about this. I've watched and listened to your podcasts, and you and I share philosophies in so many ways. It's the block by block. You could, on one side of the street, I think I've heard you say this, on one side of the street, it could be a different valuation than on the other side because 3 buildings in a row have been rehabbed.
Sure.
Across the street, it's still not so nice.
Yep. No, totally fair. It sounds to me like, at least at one point, and maybe you still are today, an absolute cold calling machine. And that probably means that you know the blocks, you know the neighborhoods, you know the buildings, and you and your team are calling or maybe physically calling on people on a regular basis.
Yes, including my young partner and my son and others. We had a guy named Dan who was a cold caller. He had a disability, which was no memory. So he would make calls on the phone, and he'd call someone up and he'd say, "Hey, Steve, are you looking to move?" And Steve would say, "No." So Dan, with no memory, forgot that he called Steve, and he'd call him right back. "Hey, Steve, it's Dan. Are you looking to move?" And Steve said, "Dan, you just called me." You have to be like that. Now, he was, talk about a machine. For 5 straight years, he would make hundreds of dials a day.
Yep.
I used to get emails from people that he would call that I knew. And one person said, "Tell your knucklehead to stop calling me." So, it's not that he was a knucklehead. He had a disability. So I called his friend back and I said, "Jim, Dan has a memory disability." And so Jim said, "Oh, okay. All right. Let him call me." Okay.
His disability was his ability. It was his superpower.
Yeah. Superpower. I used to say, "Dan, you are our secret weapon." But he couldn't go door to door because his disability he couldn't have a conversation with someone beyond asking the question that he was trained to ask. So he had to do it on the phone. I've got so many great stories about being thrown out of places, especially when I train new people, when I'm a mentor. I walked into a place when I was younger and I needed to fill up a building in the neighborhood. And there were these 2 big guys, like football player, big guys sitting in the front office. And just one of my lines was, "Hey, you want to move out of this dump?" You have to be sort of free with your words and kind of loose when you're cold calling.
Yeah.
And one of the guys said, "This is my brother, and this is our building. We own it, and it's not a dump." And one brother looks at the other. He says, "Let's take him out." So one brother takes me under one arm and the other under the other arm, and they pick me up. I'm 5'7", and these guys were 6'3", big. They walked me through the front door and threw me into the parking lot, where I landed on my knee, and my pants ripped on the knee. It was a suit. So I paid like $400 for this suit. It had a ripped pair because I got thrown out. So when someone says, "Have you ever been thrown out?" the answer is yes, I have.
How do you, it has to be a fundamental foundational belief for you to then do it again. And it's
yeah. I actually, with ripped pants, went to the next neighbor and did it again. One time I walked into a building. We buy buildings. We buy these little industrial buildings, little meaning probably under $5 million in our world, anywhere between $1 million and $5 million. And we try to get an 8% starting yield. So you can imagine it's hard to find those.
Yes.
And they're usually single tenant buildings, and they're usually occupied by manufacturers or distributors, mostly manufacturers. And I walk into these buildings when I'm training somebody, and I show them how I do it. So we walked into a building in Elmhurst. It was 717 Industrial Drive. I'm a little bit of an idiot savant also. I can tell you every address that I've ever done anything, thousands of them.
Incredible.
So I walked into 717 Industrial with this guy, Dennis. I said, "Watch this." I said to the receptionist, "So who would I talk to about whether you guys might want to move and sell the building?" And she said, "Oh, we're not going to sell the building." I said, "How do you know that?" Which was kind of an asshole thing to say, the way I said it. She said, "How do I know that? Because I live 7 blocks away, and I can walk to work or ride my bike. And if we ever move, I'll have to drive a longer distance." Well, she was not the decision maker. So I said, "Dennis, watch this." I said, "So you're not looking to sell your building?" And there was an office full of people, and everyone's looking like, "Whoa, who's yelling here? Who's talking so loud?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Dennis, let's leave." So we walked out, and we're on the sidewalk in front of 717 Industrial. And this guy whose last name is Kohler, I now know him, comes chasing after us. He said, "I heard you. I was sitting in the office behind where you came in, and actually we're selling the business. The company that's buying us out is moving the company out of these buildings. I own this one and the one next door, and I want to sell them." So I said, "How about a cup of coffee at Denny's?" And we drove to Denny's, and we made a deal sitting at the table at Denny's over a cup of coffee on a cold call where I said, "What? You're not looking to sell the building?" And Dennis looked at me after Denny's. He said, "That was the most incredibly bizarre thing I've ever seen." And look what happened. So we find our deals that way, and I train my staff to be cold callers, and it takes a very special, unusual, and maybe even sick individual to be able to do what I do.
You're still calling on properties, physically calling. I mean, cold knocking, cold walking. Your team is still doing that today.
Today, yes. We pick certain markets and we go there. There's nothing better. We collect a bunch of business cards or envelopes with the logo of the company on it. And I would say that we've created no less than 30 acquisitions, door-to-door canvassing over the years.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Tell me about the most recent deal you guys have done.
This was a good one. It's a great story. There's a billionaire family in Miami. Their name is Falick, and they are the owners of what's called the Duty Free Shops America. You ever seen those in the airports?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. 3 brothers. They're each probably worth $1 billion. As a family, according to Forbes or whatever, they're worth $3 billion. I found a building by accident that was being advertised in a remote place that nobody advertises buildings by a guy out of Miami who was their real estate guy. He was looking to sell an 11,000 square foot building in Chicago on a street called Rose Street. So I called him up and I said, this guy's name was Barry. I said, "Barry, I saw your ad. There's no such street in Chicago as Rose Street. I know every street in Chicago. I am a focused know-it-all. I know all the streets and all the buildings. There's no Rose Street." He says, "Well, Joel, there is." And I said, "No, there isn't." He said, "You tell me where it is." Turns out there is. Turns out there is. So the Chicago airport is called O'Hare Airport. And it's 2,000 acres of land that was bought in 1959 by Mayor Daley, the original old Mayor Daley, to build an airport. And it was called, at the time, it was actually a kind of a landing strip, I think military, and a golf course called something Orchard. And the reason that O'Hare is O-R-D is because it used to be a golf course called something Orchard.
Okay.
Orchard. So Daley needed to connect the land through another village because Chicago didn't directly touch the land that was going to be O'Hare. And he went to the village of Rosemont, and the mayor there, whose name was Mayor Stevens, was a young guy, became very famous as a very interesting mayor. And Rosemont is where the hotels and restaurants and office buildings are next to O'Hare. That's today. But in 1959, it was a cow patch. So Daley went to this other mayor and he said, "I need a strip of land in your village to connect my city to my airport." And Mayor Stevens said, "Sorry, it's going to be called Rosemont International Airport. You lose." And Mayor Daley said, "Where are you going to get your water from?" And Stevens said, "From Lake Michigan." He said, "Yeah, well, I'm in your way because I own Lake Michigan's water access. So I'll give you a big water pipe, but you got to give me that land so I can build my airport." So it's a 180-foot strip of land that has 2 streets on it that are 180 feet long. And Rose Street is one of them. And that's why I've never heard of it. There's only 2 buildings on the street, and none of them have ever been on the market. So these billionaires in Florida closed their warehouse next to O'Hare and needed to sell it. And so we bought it, and then we leased it to a company that the guy was on you ever see Undercover Boss?
Oh, yeah. Love it.
David Seelinger's, I think it was season 6, episode 6, owns a company called Empire CLS. I don't know if you saw that episode, but they are in the chauffeur business.
No, okay. Uh-huh.
They have 700 cities. They're the largest chauffeur service in the world. They do $150 million in sales. And this guy was on Undercover Boss. He put on a fake mustache and beard and a wig.
Okay.
And he rode around in limos with his people, and he sat at the dispatch office. It was a cute episode. Yeah. So we leased it to him to store his fancy cars, the highest end, and to have the dispatch office. And we're raising money for it right now. What we do is we buy the properties with our own money first. And then we syndicate slowly, and we pick our investors based on who we think would be a good fit to invest in it with us.
Yeah, that's a unique strategy.
Yeah. And it starts out at a 7% return. And during the lease term, it goes up 7, 7.25, 7.5, 7.75, all the way up. And we're really excited about it. We rehab the building, put a new roof on it, new windows, new bathrooms. And so we're raising money in chunks of $50,000 for that. And we're raising $2 million altogether.
Tell me, let's dive there, and then I'm going to go back to kind of what's in between the two bookends, if you will. So tell me more about that. $50,000 doesn't sound like a lot. So give me the thoughts and your strategy regarding picking your investors and why you do what you're doing the way you do it today.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me try to explain back to what we talked about earlier, which is it's all about relationships. Mm-hmm. We have too many investors and not enough properties. Right. So in this case, I only have $2 million to syndicate, and I can't go to my $1 million investors or I'd be leaving out everybody else. So I have to figure out who would be what's the best mix of investors for this deal. We know that, first of all, it's all cash and there's no mortgage, and there will never be a mortgage. I got so badly hurt in 2008 and in 1991. I've been through 4 cycles. And the one thing I've learned is very wealthy people don't want to lose their money. They're not trying to make a killing. You know, a lot of the podcasts we see are people talking to these young guys. Hey, here's how you get started. My guys are guys who don't need to get started. They own or have sold businesses, or they've been doctors for years. They're very wealthy. And they like our stuff because it's sort of in their safe category, because there's no bank, no one's going to foreclose. They're going to get consistent cash flow most of the time. And one of my biggest issues is also allowing for some growth. So we have to leave room for some new investors. So what I do is I say, for the $2 million, let's have $500,000 worth for new investors. But I don't want anyone to put much more than 50 or 100,000 into it, or it leaves everybody else out. So when somebody starts with us, even if they're a bigger investor, I say, I need you to start smaller. And they say, well, I've never heard of that. Who says start smaller? And the reason is because someone who wants to get their toe in the water can put 100,000 into something. And maybe if we get the next bigger building, then they can put their 500,000 in. But for the beginning, most people are happy to start with a small investment in one syndication. And I then get to bring in my new group and go to my old group, to the people who are looking to do something now. And the toughest part is when too many people want it and there's not enough available.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Let's go back. I want to fill in the bookends, and then I think we'll further this conversation a little deeper. You do things a certain way, and a lot of that is, probably the lessons you've learned over the years. You mentioned 91 and 2008. So take me to both time periods and walk me through where things were and the lessons that you learned there and how it's changed your trajectory, the way you do business today.
So very much like you, I started out brokering, and I built my own brokerage company. It was called Epic Savage. You ever watch Wonder Years?
You bet. So, Fred Savage. I was a kid when that thing was on. Yep.
Well, Fred's mother is one of my partners, and that's because Fred's dad was my brokerage partner.
Yeah.
He was from Chicago, and we started our business together. And unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. Yeah. We built a company called Epic Savage, and Epic were the initials of my grandparents. And we had a lot of industrial brokers. It's all we did was industrial. And we decided to really start syndicating. And we did a few funds, and we did some individual deals. And by 2007, we had 50 buildings, hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of investors, and mortgages all over the place, 7 banks. I'd also borrowed money to help us with some bridge stuff, bridge financing, mezz financing, let's say both. I had borrowed from people who trusted me, 63 investors, $7 million. And in 2008, when everything went to hell because of the great financial crisis, the problem that I had was I had vacancies and tenants that couldn't afford to pay their rent. And I became despondent. I went into a deep, deep depression. That couch right behind me, I was on it. My wife and my parents were literally sitting in that chair watching me to make sure that I wasn't going to do something like end my life because I was so just completely devastated. I thought I had lost everybody's money. I thought that my reputation was going to be ruined. And I got up off the couch with the help of some therapy and some medication, and I went to work and I saved the portfolio. And it was miraculous because things fell into place because of hard work. But I learned from that experience that I don't have the stomach for what I would call risk or gambling in real estate. What I have to do for my own mental health, personally, it's very selfish of me, is to own properties with no debt so that no bank could ever put me in that position again, or I couldn't allow myself to be in it. And it's interesting that I found a lot of investors who agree with that. They don't want to lose either. They've worked very hard for their money and they have estates that they want to protect and they don't want to outlive their money. So when they go into deals with me, they know that the income is pretty steady unless we have a vacancy. And that I'm going to be a good shepherd of their hard-earned money and make sure that their families are safe. And I came off the couch and I went back to work, and we still have a lot of the buildings from back then. We have a building that I actually syndicated in 1989. We still have it. We're long-term holders. And if people want to get out, I introduce party A to party B and I let them work out a buyout.
How were you able to dig out of that hole? Negotiate with the banks? Is that what it,
yes.
Is that what it came down to?
Have you ever heard of a forbearance agreement?
Forbearance or workout of some nature? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, one thing we did is we sold our brokerage company, and that gave me a liquidity event. My partners and I sold to Transwestern. You know who they are?
Yes.
They are large and they are formal, and we were small and informal.
Yeah, right.
So they bought us out. It wasn't the great cultural fit that we all hoped it would be.
Right.
But, when you get bought out, sometimes it works great and sometimes it just works fair and sometimes it doesn't work.
Correct.
It's in the middle category. It worked fair.
Yeah.
We all took 5-year contracts to be brokers for them, including me.
Okay.
We had an earnout.
Yep.
So at that time, I had my portfolio separate. And the way to save a portfolio when it's in trouble is to stop digging. You dig a hole, stop digging.
Yep.
And so what happened was I made deals with the 62 of the 63 people that had loaned me money on promissory notes. One sued us. We settled. And the other 62 rode with us, which was really miraculous. And we had forbearance agreements at 3 of the 7 banks. And I don't know if you know this, but if you have a relationship at a bank, even if the buildings are not cross-collateralized, if one building is in workout, the relationship goes to workout, which means even the 4 good ones of the 5 are in workout. And workout people are absolutely, I don't even know what the worst word is that I can use, but they are in the workout department maybe because they like being nasty to people. because they didn't have to be anywhere near as nasty. All three banks, we're going to get you. We're going to get you. It's like, oh, come on. Be kind. I'm not in trouble on purpose.
Right.
They didn't understand kindness, because banks have no sense of humor and their bosses have no sense of humor. So they put you under pressure and make you pay down loans with money you don't have. It's terrible. And I'm sure it's happening to a lot of people today who had these floating rate, who the banks are coming after them. I feel so horrible for them, because that was me in 2008 and 9 and 10.
2008, 9, 10, it was a terrible personal situation. It was a terrible global situation. At the same time, it created potentially some of the greatest opportunities we've seen in the last 13 years in real estate.
Yes.
There's been a lot of comparison about that time period to this time period, although it's manifesting in a different way. You hit it on the head. There's a lot of people who had floating rates, and there's plenty of people coming off fixed rates. What was 4 is now 7, plus or minus, right? Well, I just want your take. When you're sitting here in today's seat and you're looking forward, the next year, the next 3 to 5 years, what's it look like for you?
Well, I think it's going to be kind of ugly for real estate owners. I think people who are projecting these 18 and 20% IRRs were looking backwards in the rearview mirror and saying, hey, real estate always goes up. Cap rates always go down. And projections were made and assumptions were made that were just not sustainable in the event of a downturn, the event that anything like what's happening now would happen. They didn't see it, because I think people have a very short memory, and I think that they have a very close look at the horizon. They can't look all the way down to the end, and it's really hard to do. In 2008, I didn't see it coming. I didn't understand the position we were in. And I think a lot of people are going to be in that position, and I do believe there will be buying opportunities for people who are strong enough and have dry powder. And that's the position that we're trying to be in today.
Fair to say that's how you would define people taking smart action. Are they sitting on the sidelines? Are you sitting on the sidelines? Or are you still buying any deal that makes sense today, given whatever your buy parameters are? Still doing the deal?
There are almost no deals that make sense today.
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe that if we paid $5 million for almost any building today, that unless most of the economists are wrong, soft landing, hard landing, whatever happens to the economy, I don't know. But I'm pretty sure that $5 million of investment today could easily be worth $4 million in a year and a half.
Almost no matter the structure, almost no matter the deal that you bought today.
Almost no matter. The market's bigger than all of us. There may be, you ever watch this guy, Jim Cramer on CNBC? He says there's always a bull market somewhere. Well, there are deals somewhere. There are deals everywhere that are good deals because there's motivated sellers or people who have something going on where they have to sell a family situation. They need money for taxes.
Yeah.
We are under contract to buy 3 properties, but I've walked away from 5 that I've looked at over the past 4 months because I'm afraid that we'll be the chump if we buy them.
Yeah. So what I hear you saying is, I suspect between the 3 that you're under contract to buy today, it's a function of much longer term hold periods. You have to have an extended view on this, given that today's value may be, next year's value may be lower than today's value.
Yeah, and we're long-term holders, we're not flippers. So yeah. I don't look at a building and say, wow, let's get in and maybe in 3 years we'll make an 18% IRR and get out. One of the beefs I have with some of these people who are on CrowdStreet or on one of these other platforms, and I could name a list of these investment groups that bring in syndication money, funds and whatever else. When they buy something and they say our hold period is 3 years, what it means to me is that they don't really like the property that much. I'm married. When I married my wife, I didn't say, let's get married for 3 years and see what happens.
Yeah.
I'm going to need a better wife than you. I'm going to get rid of you in 3 years and get a better one. And I look at buildings like that. When you buy a building, if you're not buying something that you really believe in, don't buy it. And if you really believe in it, why are you selling it in 3 years? What are you going to do with the money? Find a better deal than the one you love? So I'm a long-term holder because I believe when we finally decide something is right and we work so hard to get it, why am I getting rid of it in 3 years? And the answer that most syndicators will give you is because they're not strong enough with their backbone to tell their investors to shut the fuck up and be in long-term like smart people do.
I think I'll butcher the quote, but Buffett has said something to the effect that when you love what you do, and I'll extrapolate that to when you love the asset, death is the only exit plan.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. I feel that way so strongly. That chair back there, I've had many an investor sit in there asking me what is your exit strategy for my investment, and I say your death. And I will tell you that this is crazy. Yeah. 43 years in the business, I have lost 70 or more investors who have died just the way we talked about it. And now I have their widows or their families as investors. Yeah. And they love this stuff. And they appreciate that dad or mom bought something with Joel that actually is really good. And now they're saying, how do I get more of this stuff with you? It's really incredible. It's a long-term ownership philosophy where, if we love it, every time I drive by a building that we've sold, I regret that we sold it. If we bought it because we really liked it, why would we sell it? And in some cases, it was the 2008 and 9 when we had to sell some stuff to save other stuff.
Yeah. You are, and certainly are connected to wonderful investors. What separates a good investor? What separates really a great investor from a good investor?
So I have a group of 8 that I call my advisory board. I never buy a building without the advisory board being consulted first. And a great investor asks great questions that make me think about whether we really want to buy a building while we're under contract and considering it during due diligence. So a great investor says, here are my concerns about this property. A good investor is somebody who says, here's money. I don't care what you do with it because I trust you. That's not quite as good as the ones who ask the questions, but I feel like the ones who ask the questions represent the good ones. Bad investors are gamblers who say, I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm going to give a whole bunch of money to a lot of people. You're just one of them. They're just dumb. They don't ask any questions and they don't understand that they should be. And those are not good investors. Those are investors who in a year or two will call and say, I didn't understand what I got into. How do I get out of this? Yeah.
Why have you been so successful when so many people have failed? Didn't make it through 2008. Won't make it through, call it 2025 because of the structures they put in place in the last 2, 3, 5, 10 years, whatever it may be.
Well, I think you and I share this philosophy. I think that our success is built on the shoulder of our failures. And I've had enough bad things happen that the lessons learned are being considered today as we make our new deals.
So speaking about new deals, what separates all the opportunities from an actual deal? What makes it a deal for you, or maybe a perfect deal for you?
So we're incredibly focused on the Chicago market, and there are a couple areas that are my favorite areas to own property because historically they appreciate a lot and they're easier to fill up when they go vacant. And in our case, that is anything in the city of Chicago has been historically for us great on appreciation because neighborhoods change a lot. The city's got so much density of population that things happen. Good things happen. Very rarely do bad things happen to a neighborhood. If it's bad, it stays bad or it gets good. It can't get much worse than horrible. So we buy in neighborhoods where we see a future. Yeah. And then near the airport, O'Hare Airport is surrounded by industrial parks. And there's one area west of O'Hare that's in a county called DuPage County where the taxes are half as much as they are just over the line to the east in Cook County.
Mm-hmm.
So we like to buy near the airport in DuPage County. Those buildings are not replaceable. So the city ones and those are not replaceable. And our exit strategy, if we ever do sell, when we sell, is almost always selling to a user, which is a company that's going to use the building to manufacture or distribute product of some kind. And then the building is a tool for their business. So when we do sell, we don't sell on a cap rate. We sell to someone who's probably a neighbor who's willing to pay us an extreme premium because they need the building for their operations. They can't afford not to buy it. And I've learned that for my niche, the success comes from buying buildings in great places that users want badly.
You said that the buildings are not replaceable. To further that a little for me, largely because they're B and C assets, you can't replace them at today's cost. I mean, you can replace the building, but it costs 2 or 3 times as much.
Yeah. So our buildings are running, our B and C stuff is running right around $100 a square foot. Replacement costs, including land's about $200.
Yeah.
So no one's tearing them down because you couldn't make it work.
Right.
So if they can't find a building that's existing, then they go out a distance from the areas we like, the infill in the city. They'll go out to the suburbs to the west where there used to be a lot of farms and now newer industrial parks are popping up. And what I've learned in the 4 cycles is those are the buildings way out there that are hardest to fill up when things get bad.
Tell me, one question that I get from outsiders to the investment space is why industrial? So I'm going to pose the question to you. You've been doing this forever. Why industrial? And then one more is like, who's in these spaces? It's a big box. Who occupies these things?
So in the Chicago area, there's 1.3 billion square feet, 1.3 billion. There are 8,000 freestanding buildings and probably an equal amount of multi-tenant buildings. And these are anything that is made or consumed is in an industrial building when it's being born or when it's being distributed. I'll give you an example. One, there was a company on Shark Tank in season 1, and it was called Element Bars. And the owner, Jonathan Miller, was making custom protein bars. And he built a little business, and then it grew and it grew. And then he needed a bigger building. And he came to us and said, your building is perfect. It was in the city. Your building is perfect. I need 50,000 square feet. I've been looking to buy for 2 years. I haven't found anything. Will you lease me your building? And we did. And he grew his business from when he moved in 4 years ago. I think he was doing 8 million in volume. He's doing 20 million in volume. He's got 8 people who work there. He's got all kinds of equipment, ovens, cooling areas, refrigerators, freezers. And that's a food user. I'll give you another one that's the craziest thing you ever heard. Do you know that Chipotle and Morton's and all the big restaurant chains rent their knives in the kitchen? They don't own them.
No.
Yep.
Can't wait for this.
Yeah. So this is not a tenant of ours. This is a prior client of mine from my brokerage days. There's a company called Cozini, and they're in the knife business. What they do, these restaurant chains don't want to sharpen their own knives, but they need very sharp knives in their kitchen. So Cozini, in multiple cities around the country, delivers freshly sharpened knives in a box to the kitchen at the restaurants, picks up a box of the ones that are dull that were being used for the past week, and then they bring them back to the industrial building, which is a B industrial building in Des Plaines on Howard Street in Des Plaines, Illinois, where 60 guys are in the back sharpening
knives.
Yeah. And these are people who are family guys. It's, let's talk about the facts. They're all Hispanic, and they're hardworking people who are really good at what they do. They sharpen these knives, and you walk through there and it makes you feel good. These are guys who are, my wife says this all the time. every job is noble, and sharpening knives and making a living for your family is noble. And the company hires people to sharpen knives and then delivers them to restaurants that use them. And you'd never know that this existed, but it's in a B industrial building. Everything. You go to the grocery store, the packaging materials for everything you buy, every section, all the food. Go to Home Depot, everything on every shelf was made somewhere and distributed somewhere, all industrial buildings. And we do the little ones, the ones that are under 100,000 square feet, because then we don't compete with the institutions who are willing to buy for a cap rate, which we don't do.
So you've done this for a long time and had tremendous success over the years. You could do a whole bunch of anything. Well, my question to you is why in today, with your ability to choose, and you've had this choice for some time, why do you stay in industrial? Why not tack on apartments, which have been very much in flavor for years now? Why not something else?
I totally respect people who do apartments and do multifamily and who do other asset classes. But I have learned that if you do one thing 10,000 times, no one can do better than you. It's like these high performance athletes. Why don't they do multiple sports when they grow up? You know, Michael Jordan did very badly at baseball, but he was great at basketball. So I think you find something that you're going to make a commitment to and you do it over and over and over, you get to be the best at it. And therefore, you and your investors, in our case, are protected, make more money. And industrial's got two things that are different than most other things. They're net leases. Our buildings are net leases. The tenant pays rent. They cut their own lawn. They plow their own snow. They fix their own HVAC units. They repair their parking lot. So because they pay the taxes, insurance, and maintenance, it's great. Net leases are amazing. It's much easier to manage. And industrial's unbelievable in terms of just what we talked about before. Every business in the world is a niche to somebody. And we get to see all these people in various businesses. They make pumps, they make motors, they make magnets, they make the cups that yogurt goes into in the store, they make the plastic tops that go on soda bottles. Everything you can think of is made in one of these kind of buildings that we own. And when someone goes into a business and invests in all that equipment, they're there for the long term. Our average tenant stays for 16 years. I mean, It's just, how do you beat that? And every year the rent goes up.
Incredible.
So, yeah, we love it. It's great.
Let's do this. But I want to move on to the final segment, what I call the final four. What do you think holds most passive investors back from hitting their personal next level, whatever that happens to be?
Passive investors, I think probably not having enough capacity to make a lot of diversified investments. It's really important. I tell people that they should not invest any more than, say, between 1% and 3% of their net worth in any one of our deals. And if someone doesn't have the capacity to spread it around and hit the minimums of the syndicators, I think that's a really big issue.
Outside of real estate, what are you most passionate about?
I am a grandfather.
How many?
I've got my oldest daughter has 2 daughters, and my youngest daughter has a 10-month-old who lives with us right now.
Okay.
They're fixing up a new house. So we have the pleasure of having our son-in-law and our daughter and little Rafi living here. Surprised Rafi's not crying out in the next room. So we took our 4-year-old on a train yesterday to a park, and then we went out for lunch, and then we went to the mall, and she played in the treehouse. What a day.
You have to beat those memories.
Yeah.
Your favorite book?
The 4 Agreements by Ruiz. 4 Agreements are an hour and a half read. And I think if you live your life, it's like the golden rule kind of thing. Be impeccable with your word. Really important. Don't speak badly about people. Don't talk trash to people. Be honest, which is hard in real estate. And not taking things personally. Don't take things personally. Don't make assumptions, and always do your best. It's the greatest book I think that I've ever read.
Terrific. Favorite way to make an impact in the community?
Well, I think in my case, because I work so much, it's mentoring. And my wife is a volunteer. She's not a mentor, but she is a CASA. She's a court-appointed special advocate for children who are from homes where there's abuse or neglect.
Yeah.
I think it's helping people live better lives.
Yeah, that's terrific. Joel, you have an amazing story in an incredible career spanning nearly 50 years. It's really wonderful. And, what you've learned, all the things that you've been able to build upon, and today, buying assets in total cash with the intent of preserving. It's about not losing. I don't know many people doing that. So it's really incredible. For people, they want to find you, they want to follow you, they want to connect with you. What can they do? Where should they go?
Sure. Our website is Brit Properties, BRIT, just one T, properties.com. And there's a lot of information on the website about our risk-averse philosophy. We have an article that more or less I like everybody to read. It says why you should not invest with us. It's a really funny one.
I love that.
It's sort of reverse psychology, but it does give the reasons why you shouldn't invest with someone if you don't ask the right questions.
Hey, the link's below in the show notes. Tell me, the Brit Properties, what's the genesis of the name?
Oh, man. We had a property manager, young guy, fantastic. And when we sold our Epic Savage business, we had the similar name for our syndication business. And we needed a new name because Transwestern said, you need to have a different name. Yeah. So Brad was our property manager, and he was great. And I wanted a 4-letter word. So I came up with Brad really is terrific. BRIT. He said, you named the company after your property manager? I said, that's how good you are.
That's how good you are. Brit Properties. I love it. I love it. Joel, I very much appreciate the time. This has been terrific. Thanks so much for being here.
Neil, thank you.
You bet. To our listeners, pat yourself on the back. You guys have made it to the end of the show, and most people never finish what they start. If you receive value from today's show, be sure to share it on LinkedIn, your Facebook page, or your social media platform of choice. Subscribe to never miss a valuable episode in the future. And if you found value in today's episode, give us a thumbs up with a positive review. If there's a particular topic you'd like to hear about, well, I want to hear from you. Shoot me a message on LinkedIn. The link to my profile is below in the show notes. You can connect with me there for more valuable content.